What's going on YouTube? It's Teej, back again with another video, and today I'm handing out my AFC West off-season grades. That means we're talking about the Denver Broncos, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Las Vegas Raiders. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about these four teams and their respective off-seasons. What do you think about the Raiders free agency, the Chiefs draft, and everything there in between, and what are some of the best moves throughout those different time periods? Let me hear your thoughts down below in the comments section, and I read every comment, I respond to most. Let me hear your takes from these four teams and their off-season down below. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Hit that like button if you do. Subscribe if you're new to the channel and see more football content like this, and let's jump into it. Starting by talking about the Denver Broncos. Obviously one of the bigger disappointments from the NFL last year. So much high hopes because, Nathaniel Hackett's coming in, they got Russell Wilson, and George Payton's first-time GM, and he's been waiting for a good opportunity. This is going to be when the Broncos kind of make a deep run to be that, number 2 team in the AFC West, maybe right there shoulder to shoulder with Kansas City. And well, that just did not happen last year. But I think they had, all in all, a solid offseason. I'll give it a B for free agency. My favorite signing, probably Ben Powers. Thought he could make more than he ended up doing. 4-year contract for a guy in his mid-20s. I think that's good duration too. You're kind of getting him in his prime. Sean Payton, which you could have even put as the best offseason move, but I decided not to do that. But I thought about it. But he always prioritizes having that offensive line in good shape, and specifically those guards. Think about all the moves that he did in New Orleans. Now he always kept that offensive line as a priority. Well, signing Ben Powers and also signing Mike McGlinchey, that kind of signals the same moves here in Denver. I went with Powers because a little bit younger, I think a little bit better of a player, a little bit less money annually, and McGlinchey comes with some injury concerns as well, where I could see that contract, 5 years, $87.5 million. I could see within a year or two, maybe, where they're like, yeah, we need to shed this contract. We need to move on. It didn't work out. I could see that being much more of a possibility with McGlinchey versus a Ben Powers. But even bringing back a Kareem Jackson, a really underrated move, and, signing Alex Singleton for a very manageable, like $6 million a year. I think there's a lot of really smart moves here, but maybe not one move that was like, okay, wow, that's the move that changes everything about Denver. No, it's more so filling in holes, patching things up, and then you could say the offensive line was, those two signings with Powers and McGlinchey. Maybe those are the big ticket headline moves there to fix that offensive line. But yeah, all in all, solid free agency there for Denver, and kind of building this roster in the like of what Sean Payton wants. Let me get to the NFL draft. I'll go B-. Obviously a team that didn't pick until the 3rd round. So they were able to move up and get Marvin Mims at the end of the 2nd, but still no first rounder, and they had to move up to be able to get to pick 64. I do like Marvin Mims as a prospect. Was one of my underrated wide receivers. He was actually one of the My Guys I talked about in my My Guys video, because I felt like I was higher on him than a lot of other people. But then, you get to the last couple of days of the draft, and all of a sudden there's a ton of love across the board for Marvin Mims. So he was kind of everybody's sleeper. So maybe I was ahead of it. Maybe I wasn't. But I do think he's a really interesting player. And let's say the long-term wide receiver room includes Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. I think Marvin Mims is a field-stretching slot guy who can also be a yak weapon. Really a guy who I think route running-wise can win at all 3 levels. Just not the biggest guy, so don't ask him to go win 50-50 balls, but you got Courtland Sutton for that. So now that is a big caveat, though. Is Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy both long-term pieces? I don't know. Feels like Sean McVay is committing to him, but also it sounds like there's been a lot of trade rumors around those two. So actions, words, which one do we weigh more heavily here? I'm not entirely sure. But let's say those two are long-term fixtures. I think Marvin Mims is a really nice 3. So I like that pick there at the end of the 2nd, early 3rd. But I'll go Drew Sanders just because I think he's a perfect fit for Vance Joseph, this blitzing linebacker. And I do hope they keep him at linebacker. They already had Baron Browning transitioning to edge. I think they got enough edge guys. I think Nick Benito, Randy Gregory, Baron Browning, Jacob Martin there too. I think they got enough. I think they got enough on the edge. They need to answer and get some other players to stick out there at linebacker on top of Singleton and on top of Jewell. And even those guys, like Jewell to me is probably his best skill set's coverage. And Singleton is probably best suited as a run defender. And right now, the best thing that Drew Sanders brings to the table is being a blitzer. So I think you have a linebacker that, depending on what the play is and what you're looking for out of those guys, you can kind of mix and match who you want on the field based off that. But, former 5-star recruit, played some edge at Alabama, went there as a linebacker, but ultimately the way he got on the field was at edge, and then kind of played inside linebacker at Arkansas, used a ton as a blitzer, got to see the athleticism. You see some flashes of what he could do as a coverage player, but it just hasn't fully come together in any other areas other than maybe him as a pass rusher. So a work in progress too. So maybe he didn't even see the field that much this year. Maybe he's just a special teamer. But nonetheless, I think there's some really nice upside long-term as a really nice fit in that Vance Joseph defense. And I'll give the Broncos all in all 8 B- for the draft. Offseason, I'll give it a B. And the reason I kind of lean towards B versus B- is the Sean Payton hiring. Now, granted, it wasn't my favorite hiring of the head coaching carousel. But if you're looking for stability, I mean, Sean Payton is going to be the guy that was going to be available in the market that brought that. And, I think you go from Nathaniel Hackett and what might have been there as an offensive play caller and his scheme, but he just couldn't handle it in every other way, like as a time, manager. And it felt like, even the leadership in this team kind of felt like this team was ready to have the year done by week 12, just felt like he kind of failed in all those other areas, while also the scheme wasn't wasn't helping out, Russell Wilson in that offense. Sean Payton can bring that offensive savant, kind of ability and background, while also being a guy who has managed the clock, managed a team, been a leader, been at the front of a locker room, won a Super Bowl. So I think he kind of gives them everything they thought they were going to get with Nathaniel Hackett, just at a bigger price point and obviously a lot more name notoriety and a lot more headlines because of it. So depending on what they're looking for, is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. It depends on what they're needing. But I think if you look back at what they wanted with Nathaniel Hackett, and they didn't get out of him, I think Sean Payton brings all that to the table. So that's why I lean B versus B minus. I'll still say best move is Ben Powers, but you could summon an argument that it's Sean Payton. That just wasn't my favorite head coaching hire. So if there was a team I was going to do that for, it would have been Houston with the AFC South, because I love that DeMeco Ryans hire, but they also did a lot of other things that I liked. So anyways, biggest question mark left. Sorry about that. I had to make that change on the fly there, but I'll say biggest question mark left, cornerback 2, because, maybe you could say edge, right? But I think Randy Gregory showed that he could be a really good player there in Denver last year. I think Baron Browning is more than a flash in the pan, but that is a little bit more of a lean in that direction versus I know that for certain. But I also think they have good depth. You could say linebacker, but we've already talked about that position a lot. I'll go cornerback 2. Damari Mathis, not that he couldn't step up, it's just we don't know. So we know Pat Surtain is a stud, but this is going to be a Vance Joseph defense that runs a lot of press man, and that number 2 cornerback spot, if they don't step up, if Mathis isn't the answer, or if they don't have someone who can step in and be solid enough in that role, they're not going to be targeting Pat Surtain. They're going to be targeting whoever else is on the other side of the field, and they're going to pick apart that matchup week in and week out and play in and play out. It's a big role for Mathis to step into. Not saying that it's impossible, and I thought they should have maybe chased after another cornerback option, but ultimately they're trusting Mathis, and maybe this is his breakout season. Wouldn't shock me, but at the same time, I just don't know what I'm getting into. Anyways, let's move on to the Kansas City Chiefs now. Obviously, they won the division. They won the Super Bowl last year, and this is a team where we're going to look at these grades and be like, really? Why? Do you think Kansas City's not going to be good? If you think that, then just stick with me for a second. This is just a team that doesn't need to win in all these areas, right? I don't think Kansas City needs to have an A offseason or an A draft. It's great if they get an A draft. It's awesome. If they get an A free agency, then it's cool, but what does that also mean long-term for the cap? But anyways, this is a team with Patrick Mahomes, and free agency in the NFL draft is about just getting young players on the roster, kind of filling out what holes might be there through free agency. And it's just about keeping the situation around Patrick Mahomes at an okay level. So I think, as I was going through this again, I was thinking, do I make this based on what I think the Chiefs free agency should be? Because otherwise I think this could be an A of this is what I think every Chiefs free agency period should look like. So therefore it kind of is an A in my opinion based off what I think they should be doing. But it's just too hard to tell, and what I think the Chiefs should do is so different versus what other Chiefs fans might think they need to do. So that's so subjective that I'm not going to do that. So I'll give him a B. Like that Charles Omenihu signing. Of course, Jawan Taylor is going to get a lot of headlines because they paid him a lot of money and they moved on from Orlando Brown Jr., but we'll talk about the tackles in a little bit when we get to the bottom of the screen. But I do like that Taylor signing, and I think he's on the up and up, specifically as a pass protector. But Charles Omenihu gives him that one other guy that I think could be, play in and play out, starting on the other side of George Karlaftis. And then even that kind of takes us in the NFL draft. C-. I'll go C- for the draft, B for free agency. Not that it was bad anywhere, but Omenihu solid starter, Jawan Taylor, and then a couple other re-signings, and then even bringing in a Drew Tranquill. I think there's some upside there for his coverage ability. Not a bad player, and they've had a lot of injuries at linebacker, so some extra depth there doesn't hurt. But then with the NFL draft, it's I liked Felix Anudike-Uzomah a ton. Wasn't as crazy about Rashee Rice. I mean, I liked him mostly, but I just worry about how his game's going to translate to the NFL level when he can't out-muscle and out-physical, cornerbacks that he was playing while he was at SMU. Smaller school, lesser competition, mostly across the board, right? So he's won a lot of these 50-50 contested physical opportunities. Is that going to translate to the NFL level when he's only 6 foot and kind of has average weight? We'll have to wait and see, but it's again, not impossible, but it's a little bit of a wait and see for me. But he is the archetype of wide receiver they don't have, so in that point, I kind of like it. Wanya Morris, it's an intriguing prospect because former 5-star recruit, awesome athleticism, has the frame, and there's moments on his tape where it's this guy has first-round talent. It just never really came together at Oklahoma, and they just kind of stayed as flashes. Could Kansas City be the spot that gets it out of him? Maybe, but that's such a work in progress. It might be 2 years before we really even see him get an opportunity. So I'll go C-. Felix Anudike-Uzomah, I think, is the guy that can make an immediate impact. That even leads us into the B- for the offseason grade. And the most important move is the combination of Amenihue and Felix Anudike-Uzomah. If you've been around the channel throughout this offseason, how many times have I said, Kansas City, just add pass rush, add another guy, add another guy. I want pass rushers. You're going to be winning a lot of games. You're going to be playing out in front. I want nonstop pass rush, pressure on the opposing team. I want a deep rotation. I want you to look like the Philadelphia Eagles and the San Francisco 49ers, right? And they're not those two teams level of deep at edge, but you bring in Amenihue, who I think could be a down and a down out starter with George Karlaftis, especially on early down, because I don't think Felix Anudike-Uzomah is going to be a great run defender. But then you get into those pass situations, maybe move Karlaftis inside, maybe Amenihue shifts inside, or one of those two guys comes off the field, and you're just bringing on a guy with awesome bend, a really good first step at Felix Anudike-Uzomah, and a proven pass rusher with a lot of production at K-State. So I just love that they continue to add to the edge group, because that's kind of what I wanted to see out of them this offseason, because we know Kansas City's going to be good next year. We know they're going to be playing out in front. And if this team has a truly transformative pass rush, which we haven't really seen, we've seen them be a good pass rush team, mostly Chris Jones, right? And then you get Frank Clark, who goes crazy during the postseason. But if this team legitimately could have like a top 10 pass rush, this becomes it makes it that much harder to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, which they're already hard to beat. So that's why I was like, dude, load up at edge, and that they did. And my favorite moves, both from the draft and free agency, were addressing edge. Biggest question mark, I'll go offensive tackle. Now, I'm not saying Jawaan Taylor and Donovan Smith aren't going to work. That's not at all what I'm saying. A lot of these other biggest question mark lefts I've had as legitimate, like, this guy needs to step up, and I haven't seen him play football before. Or they have nobody at this position, and maybe this is the one guy that could kind of step up, kind of like the Cardinals from the NFC West one, where it's like, I don't love who they have at edge, but maybe Cam Thomas is the guy who could break out. Well, these are two guys that I think can play good football. It's just we haven't seen Donovan Smith in Kansas City. We haven't seen Jawaan Taylor in Kansas City. And sometimes all that newness can at least get off to a slow start, at least. If you're a basketball fan, remember the beginning of the Big Three in Miami, and everyone was freaking out because Bosh, Wade, LeBron, they were like 500 through the first 20 games. Sometimes it takes time. And maybe that's the case here with Kansas City, or maybe these two guys, maybe Donovan Smith hits a wall. And what happens if Kansas City doesn't have that solid left tackle? Or what if Jawaan Taylor, doesn't live up to the money? What happens then? So there is a little bit of a risk-reward proposition. I'd be in the camp that says these two guys are going to be more than fine. But there is also a pathway where these two guys don't work out, or at least one of those two guys doesn't work out, and then you're leaning on Lucas Niang or Darren Kennard or someone like that to step in and start. But again, if you were to ask me, I think these guys will be fine. Love the process for Donovan Smith. This is very similar to what I thought the Eagles did with James Bradbury and some of the other late free agency signings, where it's just like, this guy can still play. He just didn't fit on the other team's cap, and now we can get him for less than $10 million for a solid, average NFL tackle. Even as an average player at that position, less than $10 million is going to be a steal because of the shortage on offensive line talent. And then Jawaan Taylor, yeah, he's making a lot of money, but I think he's on the up and up when it comes to him being specifically as a pass protector. But I could think he could be one of the best tackles in football, specifically from that pass protection standpoint, over the course of his contract in Kansas City. And this team's going to pass it a ton, so he's just kind of a natural fit for them. So then let's leave Kansas City, and let's talk about our last team, or second to last team, rather. The Las Vegas Raiders, 6-11 last year, first year of the Josh McDaniels regime, and Dave Ziegler is the GM. I can't lie to you. I didn't love their offseason. It's not bad, though. Free agency, great. I'll go C. They bring in Jimmy Garoppolo, right? And I will say they add a ton of okay options at a lot of different positions. And we'll kind of talk about that with biggest question marks left. But signing a Duke Shelley, bringing in a Brandon Facyson. Like, they brought in a bunch of guys where if you were to tell me, hey, this guy ended up being an okay starter, not good, but okay, I could see where there's a lot of guys that they sign where it's like, that guy could be solid. He could be good enough. He could be good enough. But a lot of it's also like uninspiring because of that. Because like Brandon Facyson, his upside is like, he's okay. Duke Shelley, his upside is probably, I think he's maybe a little bit better than okay. And when you're if you're a fan of the Raiders, I bet you're looking at these signings and you're like, really, is this what we're aiming for? Is this what we're prioritizing? Is this what we're going after? Is that what we're doing now? So I can see either side of it where it's frustrating, but also it kind of just builds the depth and it kind of maintains a high floor for this team, because I feel like they have enough guys who can be solid or good enough, rather. I think that's more the apt way to describe it. But Jacoby Myers is the one free agent signing where it's like, okay, I actually really kind of dig what they're going for here. When he's not a number one, I think he could be a really good player. And he was the number one in New England and still had okay production. But now he's getting to play behind who I still think is the best wide receiver in football in Davante Adams. So yeah, that's a really complimentary role for him. If they keep Hunter Renfrow around, then boom, he kind of is that 2A, 2B, depending on what they're looking for and what the matchup is, who they're looking to target against. Hunter Renfrow, Jacoby Myers could be those complementary pieces around Davante Adams, which wasn't necessarily the biggest strength for the Raiders last year. Matt Collins had a breakout season, but Hunter Renfrow a little bit of a down year. And I think part of it's Derek Carr just not really acclimating to that McDaniels offense. But now that I know they have these pieces around Garoppolo who knows that McDaniels offense, this is an offense that's very much taking the image of New England, which makes me think things are going to operate a little bit more smoothly. Which even on that note, let's transition to the NFL draft. I'll give it a C+. It was a very safe draft. Like, this is one where it's like, I'm not surprised if a lot of this doesn't work out, with the exception of Tyree Wilson, who I would have had as my best pick. But the longer I sit with the idea of that foot injury and him maybe having to miss some significant time as a rookie, I get a little bit more hesitant, and maybe he'll never be the player that his upside says he could be, because he's this freaky long player who has good strength, solid run defender, but is kind of figuring it out now as a pass rusher. Like, there was so much hype around Tyree Wilson. Maybe he's the first edge off the board. There was a lot of people thinking that was going to happen. So even him falling to 7, if he doesn't work out, the Raiders are not going to be hated for that, because it's like, well, there were some teams who had him higher than Will Anderson. That was the smart pick. That was the safe pick. Again, kind of coming back to this theme of being a safe draft here for Las Vegas. But I do think that move comes with risk, and I would have had it as my best pick, but that foot injury is kind of starting to scare me now. But instead, I'll go Michael Mayer, take him to the top of the second round. He is very New England tight end, good blocker, really good yards after the catch guy. And he was coined Baby Gronk, but I don't think he's quite that game changer. I'm going to take this game over type of special. But can win over the middle of the field, can be hard to bring down. They can be an even better blocker and an even better route runner at the NFL level, especially when he's not the only guy who in a Notre Dame offense is looking to, because Notre Dame's wide receivers last year weren't great. It was Michael Mayer and Michael Mayer only. Now he's going to an offense that, again, has Jacoby Myers, Davante Adams, Hunter Renfrow. He doesn't need to be the game-winning player. He doesn't need to be the guy who wins a game for an offense. He just needs to be a part in the mix. So I think he's going to be a really solid player there for that. But again, very New England tight end, very good fit for what I think they're going to try to do. And I like his blocking plus receiving ability. I think that's something that McDaniels wanted in a tight end. And I can easily see, tight ends typically take a little bit more than a year to kind of hit the ground running. But I know O.J. Howard and Austin Hooper are there. I'd be kind of surprised if Michael Mayer is not there leading tight end even by week 1, if I'm honest. But there's some other picks in here that I didn't hate, but Byron Young in the 3rd round against safe, kind of a solid run defending defensive tackle. I don't think they're going to get much out of him as a pass rusher, but he's a solid run defender, and they need to get better at run defense. So yeah, it kind of makes sense there, but yeah, it's just kind of safe. So I think this roster got better, but they didn't take any big chances. There's no high upside guy other than Tyree Wilson that says, wow, this could change everything about that Raiders defense in specific. But there's solid moves across the board, so I'll give it a C+. Offseason, I'll go C. And to me, those best moves, adding Mayer and Myers. One, because Eminem, that's cool. But now that's offense, I feel confident with how it'll look and operate as a McDaniels kind of, what they used to do in New England when McDaniels was the OC. Because I know Jimmy Garoppolo knows that offense a lot more than Derek Carr and could run it at a lot higher level than Derek Carr. I think Derek Carr's still a better player than Garoppolo, but when it comes to running that McDaniels offense, I totally think that Jimmy Garoppolo is ultimately going to be the guy who runs it better than Carr. And then, Jacoby Myers is a better player than Matt Collins. Turnover at tight end, but long term, for the next 4 years, I think I'd lean towards having Michael Mayer versus Darren Waller. That's tough because Darren Waller in the next 4 years could still be one of the best tight ends in football, but he's missed so much time, and also that culture fit in Las Vegas clearly didn't work, so that's another reason why they kind of had to move on from Waller. But just, in a vacuum, Waller for 4 years, Mayer for 4 years, I think there's a pathway for either one being a better option. Waller can miss significant time over the next 4 years, or he could be a freak tight end and live up to that potential. And Michael Mayer for his own, very dependable player. Maybe he has even more potential in the tank. So, that might end up being a net even move, we'll just call it, for the next 4 years. But I think this is a supporting cast around Jimmy Garoppolo and Davante Adams that more fits what McDaniels looks for. So I think that offense, again, is going to run a lot more smooth. Biggest question mark left, I got to go cornerback. I have got to go cornerback. Like Nate Hobbs, played some outside last year, but I think they're going to keep him the nickel. And then it comes down to Brandon Faison, Duke Shelley, a lot of these veteran corners who, again, I think could be okay, but it's kind of uninspiring when you're settling for okay. Duke Shelley's the one guy where it's like, down the stretch last year, he was actually pretty solid for Minnesota, but he's 5'9", so he's kind of undersized. How much of that is, the zone heavy defense, they're keeping the ball in front of you. Is that why he had good PFF grades? Because they're playing soft, conservative, safe defense, and in turn, Shelley's grades, kind of get boosted up because he's not giving up touchdowns, not giving up 80-yard bombs over the top. Maybe. But Patrick Graham running a lot of different coverages. That assignment's going to be a lot harder in Vegas than it was in Minnesota. So we're going to find out what Duke Shelley's all about this upcoming season. And maybe he's the guy that can break out because I do like how he played at the end of last season and a younger guy as well. And then we get to the Los Angeles Chargers to round out today's video. I'll give him a C- for free agency. Eric Kendricks was the one big ticket signing. Honorable mention of the re-signing of Morgan Fox. Did like that move. But a lot of what they did in free agency, really, I should rephrase that too. They didn't do a whole lot during free agency. Eric Kendricks was the one hey, this guy, bringing him on from another team. And they needed an upgrade at linebacker. Kenneth Murray's still there. But, Kenneth Murray just really hasn't been a fit for that defense, both before Brandon Staley and then during this Brandon Staley era. He's been kind of an odd mix in there. He's really good as a pass rusher and not much else. So I think Kendricks is much more of a fit in that. And I think he could be a really good coverage player for them, especially with Diane Henley, who they took in the 3rd round. I think that could be a really nice coverage duo there in the middle of that defense and make that, Staley defense that much more powerful and that much more potent. That being said, Eric Kendricks was by far a better 4-3 linebacker in Minnesota versus playing in a 3-4 last year. Is that age or is that the situation around him? Because also that Minnesota defense as a whole was just bad. Defensive tackles weren't doing much to keep him clean, right? So there's a lot of complicating factors that I could see where he gets a bump this year. He plays better, but he is still a linebacker over the age of 30 with, even in his prime, wasn't the most gaudy athlete, right? Like, we're still talking about him being towards the end of his playing time. Father time is not too far away from Eric Kendricks, but I do think he can be an upgrade for a team that really needed one at linebacker, which we'll come back to with Diane Henley later. Draft, I'll give a B+. Quentin Johnson, probably my favorite pick. He was my wide receiver 1, and I just look at this fit in Los Angeles, and it's like, dude, they got a basketball team. Quentin Johnson, 6'2", almost 6'3". Mike Williams, 6'3". Keenan Allen, 6'3". Like, they got dudes. They got some size there, which I really like. And, especially Mike Williams, he plays with that size. Quentin Johnson, maybe not always as much, but I think you can polish up his, ball tracking and his deep ball skills and get him into that spot. And Keenan Allen, yeah, he does a little bit, but he just works underneath so much that you don't really think about the fact that he's 6'3". But more so with Johnston, what he brings to the table that the Chargers didn't have, it's long speed and it's yards after the catch ability. Keenan Allen's not a terrible yak guy, but he's not an explosive athlete, so it's more so like he gets open the middle of the field and then falls forward for a first down. That's kind of what it is. He used to have some more shift, but I don't think he's that type of guy anymore. Mike Williams never really been that guy. So Quentin Johnston, one of the highest forced missed tackle rates of any of the wide receivers in this past draft class. Great with the ball in his hands at TCU, and that was kind of his role. Like, you're going to get open deep down the field or we're going to throw you a bubble. And that was kind of what they asked of him. But he's also a guy who, look at the Michigan game in the college football playoff. Catch a 6-yard drag and take it to the house because he's great acceleration, ability to work, obviously a very fast guy, but also in the open field, hard to bring down. And he also does it with a bigger frame, which is a little different than what you would expect. You kind of look at Marvin Mims and you're like, that's the shifty, elusive, small wide receiver we expect to be pretty good with the ball in their hands. Johnston, not really that build that you would think that, but he actually really is good with the ball in his hands, and that's kind of a missing skill set right now in LA. And then, of course, that long speed. We've been looking for Justin Herbert to take that step forward, play more aggressive, take more shots, take advantage of his arm strength, flip the field. And I think that comes both with the OC change as well as the drafting of Quentin Johnston, which we'll come back to Kellen Moore in just a moment. I'm being a little cheeky there, but Quentin Johnston, I think, brings that long speed that Mike Williams can work downfield, but he's going to win in a contested catch situation. And Keenan Allen works underneath and in the intermediate. So, he's just that wide receiver they didn't have. But kind of moving on to the offseason grade, B- overall. Those other two of those first 3 picks that I really did enjoy. Tuli Tuipulotu. We've seen Mack miss time. We've seen Bosa miss time. They needed that third pass rusher in the event that one of those two guys gets hurt, and they can have a solid, guy step in and at least keep, the ship afloat and still give you some good production. Tuipulotu, wish we could have known the athletic numbers, never tested both pro day, combine, anything like that. But dude is a natural when it comes to getting off blocks, both in the run game and as a pass rusher. So had we known what the athletic numbers were, he might have been a first rounder if he tested off the charts or better than we expected. And, maybe he's a guy who only had the play, and that's why he didn't test. We just don't know yet. But as a second rounder, I think that's about where he was going to go. And I do like the tape mostly. And again, insurance in the event of a Mac or Bosa injury, or best case scenario, those guys stay healthy and you have an awesome pass rush trio. And then Diane Henley, this guy who, a little small, can get blocked out of plays, but also really good at shooting gaps, really good tackler, and a great coverage player with a ton of athleticism to play sideline to sideline. So Kendricks may not be that uber athletic guy, but he's got it above the shoulders. And I think that's the perfect pairing with Diane Henley, who's got awesome athleticism. I also think he's a smart football player, 6 years of college football, I think ready to go there, but Eric Kendricks might be able to teach him that much more. And that could be the 1-2 punch there in the middle of that 3-4 defense and a zone-heavy defense where you're asking your linebackers to do a ton of coverage. That could be the tandem that gets the job done and takes this defense to another level, at least in the coverage standpoint. Biggest question mark left, I got to go OC here, Kellen Moore. But let me give you what I would say if I wasn't going coaching staff. It'd be cornerback, which is tough because, this cover 4 defense is really the strength of it is limiting big plays, right? Like you're playing quarters, there's not going to be bombs that go over your head more often than not. And you're going to force teams to work, long methodical drives, get down in the red zone and beat you in a 20-yard spot where it's hard you can't get over the top, and the passing windows are tighter. You have to be able to win on the ground, which the Chargers struggled with stopping the run, but that's another conversation for another day. But that's it's a safe defense, but J.C. Jackson's kind of a risk taker, and also been really good in man coverage zone, especially last year wasn't necessarily his forte, but this does feel like a zone defense he would acclimate to, which is a little weird that he struggled with it. And Asante Samuel Jr., we saw it in the wild card game alone. He is a risk taker. He's going to take shots. So it kind of feels like they have personnel that doesn't totally fit in regard of like mentality for this defense, but I do think all these guys can be good at playing in this quarters defense. And Michael Davis is solid. He's good enough. He's a corner. If he's on your roster, you're not upset about it. Now, he makes good money for being fine. But again, another topic for another day. I just need these corners to step up. I need J.C. Jackson to get back on track because he was disappointing pre-injury. Asante Samuel needs to get even better and kind of time up those risks a little bit better. Still give up a lot of yards, give up some big plays, but also create a lot of turnovers, so boom-bust factor there. But J.C. Jackson specific needs to be the guy that stepped up this year and takes that secondary to where we thought it would be last year after they signed him. Anyways, though, last note, offensive coordinator, though, really is my biggest question mark because for the last 2-3 years, I've been saying Joe Lombardi's not the answer. He's not the guy. He's not forcing Justin Herbert to push the ball down the field. They're not engineering deep throws, and Herbert's got a cannon for an arm. They need to be in his ear saying, take more shots. And Lombardi's not drawing it that way, and he's not getting his quarterback to take those chances. Kellen Moore, I think, can change that up. Now, granted, this Dallas offense that Moore ran wasn't always taking, big play bombs and, always trying to force the ball over the top. But they took more chances than the Chargers than Joe Lombardi. And they also asked a lot of their tight ends, so I'm interested to see how that plays into the mix this year. But all in all, I just think Kellen Moore did more to open up that Dallas offense than what we ever saw out of Joe Lombardi with the Chargers in his stint there in LA. So I think Kellen Moore will raise the floor of this offense and make it that much better. And I just pray to the football gods that he gets Justin Herbert to take more chances down the field and take advantage of a howitzer of an arm that he has. Perhaps the best arm in football. Him, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, all in that conversation. But anyways, another topic for another day. That's going to do it for my AFC West offseason grades. Let me know what you think about these 4 teams and their respective offseasons. Who do you think one of these 4 teams, maybe the NFL draft or free agency or the offseason as a whole? Love to hear all your thoughts down below in the comment section. Also, shout out some favorite moves you had for these 4 squads down below. But hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hit that like button if you did. Subscribe if you're new to the channel and want to see more football content like this. But that's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Teach, and I am signing off.